All right. Going to go ahead and get back in here. Took me a couple extra minutes there. I had my son just got his schedule confirmation from his school and wanted to ask me some questions. So people are adding. I'm going to go to the paddle. I'm not going to switch off because we are recording this, but I'll add it later as a link. Seeing some very interesting information on here. Homelessness, abuse, and neglect. I see the wellness centers being mentioned, school psychologists, positive classroom environment, missing parents, yep, physical, mental abuse, yep, no food at home, substance abuse. A couple of you mentioned addiction and substance abuse. That is huge, 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 huge. And then, of course, there's the data about what that means for our students as far as their likelihood. In-house support. You know, I'm glad to see I'm not the only person who keeps a list of referral agencies. Very glad to see that because sometimes we have to be that resource for our kids and their parents. And it's hard for them to find help. They don't know where to go, and it's tough. I see the wellness centers mentioned. Okay, so the wellness centers, a little history on that. So when I was at North Salinas High, we started to talk about how to deal with some of the issues we were dealing with, repetitive behaviors that I just really felt were avoidance issues related to this, the stuff that we've been talking about today. And when I became principal at Alvarez, I had an assistant principal who's no longer with us, Jessica Rogers, and we had another teacher who's no longer with us. They're not dead; they're just in different districts. Who basically we started talking, and they were sort of a mind. They were really strong in PBIS, but they were really strong in the social emotional learning aspect of it. We started to talk about ways to improve culture and climate, student behavior from a behavioral standpoint, and dealing with what was going on outside. We saw these same things that you're talking about. And so we talked about coming up, the term wellness center was born in the conference room at Alvarez High School, and among 3 or 4 of us. And we went to Dr. Sabah, and it was tough. She gave us the thumbs up right away. She was super supportive. But when you try to go and hire a social worker to work at a high school, you run into all kinds of problems. We don't have a certificated position that matches this. And you don't have the money to put them on the school psychologist scale. And besides, you're not authorized another one. So we went back and forth for 6 or 7 months before we found a way to cobble together, using our categorical funds. The next year, Dr. Sabah liked what she saw. And from that grew the first physical wellness center, and now this like $30 million building project that is everywhere. So that was pretty cool to see that grow. I hope it's continuously used the way it was intended and not just a timeout center to be another form of in-school suspension. It really is there to foster reconciliation, to foster resilience, and to help students function better in their day-to-day. So a lot of common things there. So a lot of you mentioned positive and safe classroom environment. I'm going to promote Tim Amaral's session that's coming up. You really want to go take that. He gets deep into how to do that. and it's just great. So, all right. So thank you so much for your contributions there. We're going to move on. All right. So, leveraging what we know about these positive experiences to really fight and combat what's going on in our classroom with our students. I really want to say it's hard to be hyperbolic about what trauma does to kids. You almost cannot, um, you almost cannot uh, say too much about the damage that childhood trauma does to learning and to the environment in our classroom. And so it's almost like a domino effect. If you have one or two students or four or five students, which is not unheard of, in your classroom, all dealing with these effects, it's very likely that there's going to be spillover that's going to affect your other students. These behaviors we've been talking about are disruptive for other students, but there's a reason for it. I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of that. And one of the ways that has helped me do that, and others that I've worked with, is understanding that we have our own trauma and using that to develop empathy. I did not go to do a PhD in psychology so that I could take care of my own issues. I did therapy way before that. I'll be transparent here. I have a therapist. I've been doing, as many of you know, I've been a public safety chaplain for 22 years as a volunteer. I've seen some stuff and lived through some stuff. And when we lost our officer JD in Salinas Police back in February, my journey with those people that were affected by that started at 2 a.m. that night. And I'm still working with them. Still dealing with things like a suicide that we had because of that, related to that incident. And I'm just going to say, sometimes I have a contact in my phone. I reach out to him. We set up a half an hour or an hour, and I get some help and just let it go. You don't know what's going to trigger you sometimes. But remember what I've said about post-traumatic growth. Adversity can lead to real growth and real improvement. And if you embrace that, and you can talk to students who are struggling about this, is you're not stuck where you are. You can be better than you imagined. It means a lot. So we also have these programmatic interventions and mentoring, our after school programs, therapeutic interventions. Please, give people referral information to school psych and other resources, social emotional learning, even how we do our instruction. How can we be less threatening? I remember the first time I heard about low demand instruction was I was taking a little course on adult education. And doing trainings and doing work with adults and teaching adults is tricky because they shut you down if they feel like they're being pushed too hard. Teenagers do this too. They just aren't as obvious about it all the time. They passively reject, or sometimes they are very demonstrative about it. But I was wondering why I was never told about this idea about low demand, easy access to instruction to bring the temperature down when there's resistance. Why I was never taught about that when I was learning how to teach kids. So some best practices, adults just model that empathy and be mindful that there is childhood trauma in your presence in the classroom. So I want to reflect just really quickly, and feel free in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute and add something, ask a question. Let's reflect on some of these and how you can put stuff into practice next week. Some things that we've talked about, maybe some other things that have occurred to you that can help as you get ready to interact with your students, some of who have experienced trauma next week. I'll give a couple minutes and let you all begin to Think about that. Tim is putting resources um, in the chat. Sam's guide, excellent. If anybody has any questions, trying to see everyone here. Dealing with limited screen space here, so I'm not able to really see if hands are up or anything. I check right now.
So, do you have any cues for yourself when you're in the classroom to like you had that great slide. Let me pop back up to it. It was, sorry, give me a second. That list, the common ways to create paces in your spaces.
Yeah.
Do you like how, because you were talking about sarcasm, I'm an extremely sarcastic teacher.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about that as you said it. So what, yes, that one. Thank you so much. What like little reminders did you have for yourself to kind of catch yourself in the moment of, oh, I'm being sarcastic. Let me back off for that and switch.
Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate that. So, what I tend to do is, it's not easy. There's no quick and easy answer to that. Part of it is I try to be, well, shoot, I'm kind of an awkward, geeky person anyway, so I tend to be kind of
Same.
sensitive to when things feel awkward or
Okay.
uncomfortable. And so I learned after about 5 years in the classroom I was paying attention to myself, but I was also learning how to juggle paying attention to my students. And so I watch faces a lot, and sometimes this can miscue you because the kids, sometimes their facial expression is totally not related to what's going on with you. They may have just read a text or something. But I try to, when I check for understanding, to also gauge how kids are feeling. And one of the things that I know has been easier, that it may be tough for some people, is I have slightly smaller classes in continuation. So I get to know the students a little bit better in one way. In another way, it's harder because they're only there sometimes for a few weeks before they earn their credits and move on. But I find that by how I spend my first few days with them, and I have to do this in each learning cycle, that process of setting up norms and setting up expectations and asking them to give me some information, kind of a low threat, low demand little thing. I send out a questionnaire at the beginning, kind of like, tell me about yourself, some of the things you like to do, things you think are fun. You know, I may notice them playing a game on their phone. And the first few times I noticed it, like, wow, that looks like that's fun. What is this? Tell me about this. And kind of show some interest in it. It's like, that's really awesome. Can you tell me more about it a little later? Hey, by the way, remember, we're trying to get you through 3 credits of math. So could you log into Synergy and, Plato at the time, and try to redirect? But engaging them lets me know what their normal affect is. So when I see a change in their affect, I can pick up on that. So if I say or do something that causes a change in their affect, I can pick up on it really quick. The other thing is, for a while, I was literally writing myself post-it notes to not be sarcastic. And it was kind of like, probably like what people go through when they're trying to stop smoking. Although sarcasm for some of us is probably more like trying to quit heroin.
But right, yeah. Like you said, breathing. I mean,
it's
upbringing, so sarcastic family.
I've had to learn how to rechannel my humor into more self-deprecating stuff, and that becomes a little, it gets a little less threatening to them that way. And if you can laugh at yourself, it really makes it more comfortable, I find, for the students. So that's one
Oh,
way
yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a good question. And that is a constant battle because every kid is different. And I know there are times where, here's the other thing. Sometimes I still, quite often probably, realize I've overstepped or done something that's upset a kid a little bit. It's really hard for teachers to do this. It was hard for me to discipline myself to do this. Apologize.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Apologize publicly. Make it up to them, even with little things. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, Mr. Fleming's not on a power trip, you know? And it's just it has created more of a laid back, easygoing approach to management in my classes. And I can feel them exhaling sometimes when they walk into my room. And it's not to say I don't have issues that I have to deal with. I've had, you know, uh, Tim and I have students who are there at the tippy top of the pyramid of interventions holding the flag as the most, challenging and challenged students in our district. But they are not, they're still kids who are, who respond pretty well to positive things. And, one of the things I'm going to be, a little vulnerable here again. I am amazed at how many times still adults look on compassion as weakness. And I will die on this hill. Okay. The times I really got in trouble as an administrator were when I cut some slack to some staff member who was going through something really rough. And I kind of walked on a couple, policies that put the person first, or defended somebody who needed defending and backed them up when they deserved to be backed up. And again, that's important to be willing to do that. There's a certain amount of moral courage. And the funny thing is, I've had people call me weak because of my compassion. But, if you're looking at me right now, look at my back wall. I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I keep my I love me wall at home with my military medals and stuff like that. I don't have to prove. 52 years old. I've had a good life. I've demonstrated what I need to demonstrate. But compassion and kindness and willing to engage with people is huge. Teachers are helpers, okay? We really are. And I've noticed this, that just like other people in certain professions are, over the summer, something fairly traumatic happened to me. I witnessed a very horrific accident. And I was the first person on scene, and I had to render a type of first aid I have not had to give in a long time. I'm not going to describe it, but I had to use first aid skills that I learned in the military, how to stop a high pressure arterial bleed, how to contain tissue and stuff like that. I'll leave it at that. And the person ended up dying when he got to the hospital. And I remember when the paramedics came and they start working and I stepped back, started to depressurize a little bit. I had been calling and asking other people for help. This guy was very large, and keeping him still while I tried to save his life was difficult. One person ran across the street from an apartment complex with a little 4-inch Johnson & Johnson home first aid kit, which was funny in retrospect, but he helped. I turned around and there were probably 20 people on the curb holding up cell phones, recording the situation. And some of them were wearing medical scrubs, 3 or 4 of them. and they were standing on the curb watching this. And I was pretty upset when I got home. Um, one of them ended up being a medical assistant who worked at one of the practices I go to, and mentioned that she had seen me there. For those who don't know, I have one leg. I was wearing shorts that day. The Venn diagram of people that look like me and have one leg in Salinas is basically a circle, and I'm in it. And so it's pretty easy for them to determine who it was. But that desire to help is deeply ingrained in me and deeply ingrained in a lot of us. It's not always in everyone else. And I'm not convinced. It's hard for me to say this because it's part of who I am and part of who many of you, but that compassion to drive us to help is not in everyone else. And it may not be in you. It may not be as deep in you. It takes an act of the will. It takes your volition to try and do this stuff. And I'm okay with being thought of as weak if it helps another person. I've gotten to the point where I'm okay with that. I'm content. So, any other questions or anything here? Any other comments? Aaron, thank you. Takeaway for me is the importance of communication, how important it is on how to effectively communicate with students. That's right. And one of the things that's tough about reflection and on that and communicating with students is we don't always communicate the same way. And so I probably annoy my students a little bit by constantly checking to see if they understand things in different ways. When we ask them to explain it to someone else, like an elbow partner or something, or we ask them to answer questions to us, it's different ways of seeing how they do. And we can kind of gauge by listening to them how much they've done it, and also having them demonstrate things. I remember in college for a while, I ran a writing lab for foreign nationals who were at our school. And the thing that I always fell for, we had several students from Japan. And for those of us that learn Cyrillic alphabets, or if you learn an Asian alphabet, you're trying to learn a language, or they're trying to learn ours, just figuring out what's on the paper is so tough sometimes. And I would ask these students, they had a beginning to get a spoken English, but their writing was not college level at all. So I would show them something and say, "You got it?" And they'd say, "Yes, thank you." And I would believe them because they said yes. But we've got to really check it and support them. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate that. Low threat, low demand. Cognitive load is huge with trauma survivors. Cognitive load theory is really kind of interesting. You ever feel like you're, that Far Side cartoon where he says, "Excuse me, can I go home? My brain is full." That's kind of what happens. You notice this. This is why when we're trying to find our way to an address we're not familiar with and there's lots of traffic, we turn the stereo down in the car. It actually does work. It doesn't make sense, but that's cognitive load theory in action. There's only so many things we can deal with. Chloe, you're welcome. I'm really glad that this meant something to you. I kind of geek out on it a little bit. So, all right. So reading up, I want to get through some things here as we leave some more chance for some more questions. So these are some books. All of these I just checked. Everything is available at Amazon right now. Nadine Burke Harris is our recently former state Surgeon General. She is a practicing physician, brilliant woman who returned to the San Francisco Bay Area to run a clinic for the poor in San Francisco. We think of San Francisco, high property values and stuff like that, but there are working poor in San Francisco, and there are children in San Francisco, as hard as they are to see sometimes. And but a lot of them think about trying to raise a family and with what the cost of living is there. And so she discovered that when she learned about ACEs, she found how impactful they were on children's health. And she also made the connection with their educational function, their emotional health as well. So The Deepest Well is her book. It's kind of it's a very approachable book. It's not research. It's not, it mentions her research in it, but it is more of a memoir driven type thing that's really good there. And Alexis, you're welcome. Yeah. The workbook for Body Keeps the Score. Absolutely. Yes. A lot of people know this, and it is very helpful. One of the things that it helped me with, thank you for bringing that up, is something called interospection, which is, the ability to kind of like be aware of our own feelings and our own experiences. And that was incredibly helpful for me in developing compassion for other people. It also helped me learn how to figure out where different feelings that I have are centered physically. Do I feel it in my gut, my chest, my head, my throat, things like that. Patricia, thank you so much. Trish, thank you. Appreciate that. We do have to lead with compassion. There is a price to it. I'm going to be honest and forthright about that. There's a price to it, but I just reached a point in my life where I'll pay that all day long because I'm embarrassed when I don't live up to those expectations. That's what my dad raised me to do. So the Body Keeps the Score is just a great book. It's a little more of a deep wade. It's a little more of a kind of clinical, but still an approachable, readable book. Very detailed. Takes him from his early work with Vietnam veterans and noticing that there were some physiological things going on. This one, Victoria Romero's book, really good for, school administrators, maybe buy it for your principal for Christmas or something, back to school gift, I don't know. School of Hope. This is a recent one. Beachboard is now presenting with Corwin and doing some things. I just found some useful little things in there. If you want some forms or ideas, I didn't want to plagiarize her, but I wanted to refer to her. And then the National Child Traumatic Stress Network has a toolkit for educators, and I put the link there. And you can go to that. It's kind of helpful. It has some great ideas. I think there's a lot of overlap with what Tim does, but just some good information there, and they update it fairly frequently. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network is a nationwide nonprofit research organization that is really important in disseminating a lot of this information. Other organizations are coming on board. Like I said, you're seeing ACEs more and more in the American Psychological Association publications. I've even seen it in the Military Psychology Journal recently from Division 15. They're starting to realize that it's important to them. Educational psychology, disappointingly enough, is not talking about ACEs very often. I think they're Division 16. They need to do more of that. But there's a special issue coming out of the APA's primary journal. They just did a call for papers last month. I'm looking forward to seeing that. I don't have the letters after my name, so I can't play this year, but want to try and do that at some point in the future. All right. Again, I want to just remind you before we close today that with our population of Latinx students, primarily Latinx students, and Asian Pacific Islanders, it brings our percentage up significantly. We have to assume that at least 12% of our students have an ACEs score of 4 or higher. And there may be local differences, remember that, because of the type of economy that we have, where we live, the cost of living. Those of you who are familiar with the real estate market know that there are 3 and 4 bedroom houses with 20, 30 people living in them. This has increased the issue of exposure to abuse and neglect and dysfunction in the home. But you have to really assume that 1 out of 10, or slightly more than 1 out of 10, have experienced significant trauma dosage. And if you think about that, if you've got, approximately 40. I think, we're in the mid 30s for a lot of classrooms. That's going to be 3 to 4 kids at least. And it's something to keep in mind. You may be able to pick them out now. If you'd like to review these materials, and again, feel free to share anything. Just, make sure you give me a hat tip. There's a link there, QR code. I've got the bit.ly for you to go to it, and you can access this presentation. You're free to stay in touch with me. I have the typical Salinas UHSD email address there. Feel free to reach out to me. I have really poor boundaries when it comes to answering emails, so you'll probably hear back fast. So just, and if I have insomnia because I'm worried about my dissertation, you may get an answer at 2 a.m, who knows? I guess it's your turn to judge me. And so if you'd go ahead and click on that, make sure I did put the link to the sign-in sheet in our chat. It's also in the beginning of the presentation. Make sure you sign in so you get paid today. And please go and to the bit.ly and fill out the evaluation to me so I can make this presentation better. This is adapted from something I've presented a couple other times to different groups. And I just try to keep making it better. Thank you to SlidesGo and for this great theme that I think kind of makes a joyful approach to a difficult subject. And if there's any other questions or anything, I'll stay on here for the last few minutes and be willing to answer. It's always tough. I'm used to taking feedback from everybody, but
I have a question.
Sure.
Marilyn Warden here. I was just wondering if there are any rules or boundaries as far as recommending resources to parents
Sure.
that are outside of official district resources.
So here's the key thing to keep in mind. If you act within your capacity and your position in the best conscience and according to your training, you're going to be fine. I would never tell a parent, I think your child has an ACE score of 7 or 8. You need to take him to this therapist, get him screened and find out. That would be pretty dangerous. That's, I'm sure there's a sped teacher out there chuckling, thinking of the time that some teacher has said things like, I think your kid is on the spectrum. Go get tested. That can get you in trouble. Also, we got to remember we're not mental health professionals and we're not clinicians. So I try to, when I meet with parents, talk to them on the phone, whatever it is. It doesn't work well with email or text, but in person and over the phone, discussing, hey, how is Jaime doing? Or how's your daughter doing? You think how does she seem to feel about school? And is life treating her well right now? You kind of get a sense and use that to angle into, if she seems sad to you or depressed or like she's struggling with some of these issues emotionally, would you like some information on somebody you could talk to, or would you like me to refer her? You can always refer a student to administration with your concerns, to a school psych with concerns. Well, do it through a counselor first. Yeah. Technically, you can refer it to anybody. And technically, the way I read Ed Code and Child Find, it's our job to do that. And I always appreciated, as an administrator, when a teacher would tell me, there's something going on. I don't know what it is. I'm really worried about this student. And then we could start working on it together. Because it just is a sign that you care and you're engaged. Does that answer your question? I would be cautious, but I would go to the counselor or an administrator first.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
If you can't develop a relationship with the parent, to have a discussion. Because you don't want to tell the parent that their kid is broken and then get in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I also want to say, if you think that you might be struggling with some of the things in your past that might be holding you back, never too late to deal with that. And, you know, I don't feel self-conscious about, I've got an appointment with my prosthetist today to get my leg adjusted. I don't feel self-conscious about going to see him or my doctor or anybody. Don't feel self-conscious about asking for help for mental health. And, we have access to that. Our insurance is actually pretty good compared to some others out there. So don't be afraid to give it a shot. It's amazing how good it can make you feel. And I'm going to say, don't ignore the spiritual aspects as well, whatever your tradition is. People are always funny to find out that, I'm an evangelical Protestant. Evangelicals become a different word. I don't put myself in that camp anymore. But I follow a Jesuit practice called spiritual direction. I have a person I meet with once a month just to talk about how essentially, to put it in layman's terms, how my values align with how I'm living my life. And it really, really helps with my peace of mind. So all those things are really good for us. We go out and go to the gym and work out our physical bodies, and that helps us a little bit with our mental health. We got to remember the other things as well. Any other questions or comments or anything?
Can you share that again? You said a Jesuit spiritual practice?
Yeah, it's
right, or link in the chat.
It's called spiritual direction. It's not really it's a practice that comes from the Jesuits, which is going to give, I'm a former Catholic, and I had a Jesuit priest. I know some people have spiritual direction. You need to type and not talk. Basically, it's not therapy, but it is a thing that really has been centering and helpful for me. It involves what you might call meditation. We can talk about it offline sometime. You want to email me about it. I've just I really enjoyed it. I found it to be refreshing and helpful for me, giving a sense of peace. In addition to the hard work of the cognitive behavioral therapy that I might do with a therapist, right? So it's just one of those things. I've tried to be a balanced person. And I got to say that one of the things I did that has helped me most become a happier, better, more joyful person, it was very hard for me to call the superintendent and say, I want to be a teacher again and step back from admin. But I had no margins left in my life. I was literally opening the ROP center at 6:45 in the morning and being there at 8 o'clock at night to lock it. It just is too much. And I got to the point where I just wanted that time back. And my family's grateful. My son's going to be a senior. I get to be there for his things now. My wife sees me not just at home in the daylight, but I'm helping cook and do dishes and clean and do the stuff that brings us all closer together and allows me to be more there for them and not just an administrator. And that was tough, though. It was tough.
Right.
Giving up the pay. That was
yeah.
But I reframed that. I have 40 more days off. That's why I have a pay cut. My actual day-to-day pay, my daily salary is $3 less than it was as a high school principal.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So, I mean, we've got to listen to ourselves and do the right thing. And I found that when I became more compassionate of my students when I had that greater cognitive space. And just being more in touch with what centers me and makes me joyful and makes me happy and electrifies me as a person, which is definitely being with those kids in the classroom. It was a good decision. I have not regretted it once.
Awesome.
And
Thank
it's the
you.
best year I've had in 15 years. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you being here. This is a tough time of year to face down the fact that, school is starting, and here you are taking a session from this boring guy who geeks out on academic stuff and a very difficult subject, and you engaged in it. And feel free to contact me at any time, any questions you have, anything you want to discuss, tell me I'm full of garbage, whatever it is, reach out. I really appreciate you being here and listening to me.
Thank you.
So, all right, everybody. Want to make sure you get your lunch break and get your next session. And please have a great year. Be safe. Take care of yourselves and each other. Be well.
Thank you. And really, honestly, thank you for this presentation.
Oh.
I'll be pestering you online for sure.
Absolutely. Anytime.
This is my nerdgasm, as I call it, as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
You rock
All
it,
right.
Matt. You rock
Yeah.
it.
Oh, thanks, Tim. Appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet. I'll see you at your next one too.
All right. You guys have a great rest of your day. Take Tim's course too. Bye-bye.